Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a subject that it sits in a very strange place in our collective memory. It's a story that almost everyone feels like they know, or at least they know the ending. It's an event that has literally entered our language as a shorthand for blind obedience.
You are referring, of course, to the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid.
Exactly. It's used so casually now. I mean, you hear it all the time. Someone buys into a corporate strategy a little too much, or they're maybe too enthusiastic about a new tech trend, and we say, oh, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. But when you actually look at the stack of sources we have for today, specifically the history of the People's Temple, the reality behind that phrase is just, well, it's gut-wrenching. It's not a joke. And as we'll find out, it wasn't even Kool-Aid.
It certainly wasn't a joke. And frankly, the popular understanding of the People's Temple is often quite shallow. We tend to view it as this inexplicable explosion of madness in the South American jungle. We picture a group of zombies following a man in sunglasses.
I think that's the caricature.
That's the one. But the sources we're looking at today paint a very different, much more complex picture. This wasn't just a sudden death cult that popped up out of nowhere. I mean, this was a political movement, a religious organization, and a social experiment that spanned decades.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive. We want to move past that caricature of Jim Jones and really unpack the how and the why, because when you look at the numbers, this scale of this tragedy is just staggering.
It is. Let's just establish the gravity of the finale before we go back to the beginning to see how we even got there. November 18th, 1978, Jonestown, Guyana. 918 people died.
918. That number it's just hard to even visualize.
It is, and to put that in perspective for you, until the attacks on September 11, 2001, this was the single largest loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act. And that number included the murder of a U.S. Congressman, Leo Ryan, on a foreign airstrip.
It's unbelievable.
But to understand how we got to that horrific day in 1978, we have to go back much, much further to a time and place that might surprise you.
Yeah, this is the first hook that really grabbed me in the research. You expect this story to start in some spooky, isolated compound, or maybe the foggy counterculture streets of San Francisco in the late 60s.
Right.
But it actually starts in the 1950s, in the heart of the Midwest, Indiana.
Precisely. And it didn't start with a message of death or control. It started with a message of racial integration and social justice. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because the man at the center of it, Jim Jones, wasn't your typical preacher. In fact, based on his own admissions later in life, he might not have been a believer in the traditional sense at all.
Okay, this is the part that just blew my mind. We have this quote from a biographical recording Jones made. He's talking about his mindset in the early 1950s. He was interested in communism, but you have to remember, this was the absolute height of the Red Scare in America.
Oh, absolutely, the McCarthy era. If you were a communist, or even just suspected of being a sympathizer, you were basically public enemy number one. You could lose your job, your social standing, everything. It was a very paranoid time.
Totally. So you couldn't just go out and be a loud and proud Marxist without getting into some serious trouble. So listen to this quote from Jones himself. I decided, how can I demonstrate my Marxism? The thought was, infiltrate the church.
Wow. That phrase, infiltrate the church, that's the key. That's the key to understanding everything that follows. It changes the entire lens through which we view his early career.
It really does. It sounds like the plot of a spy novel. He viewed the entire structure of the church not as a place of worship, but as a vehicle.
A Trojan horse.
Exactly. It was a purely utilitarian approach to religion. He saw that the church had a captive audience, an existing hierarchy, a way to mobilize people. He figured if he could wrap his Marxist ideology in the language of Pentecostal Christianity, he could reach people who would never, ever step foot in a communist meeting hall.
He basically saw the church as a delivery system for a political virus.
That's a great way to put it. And he actually found help doing this. The source mentions a Methodist superintendent who helped him get his start in the church, even though this superintendent knew Jones was a communist. Wait, really? The superintendent knew.
That's a detail that often gets overlooked, but it's crucial. It suggests that even back then, Jones had this charisma that made people overlook the massive red flags. Or maybe the superintendent thought Jones's energy could be, fixed or directed. He probably thought, well, he's radical, but he's passionate about helping the poor, so maybe we can use that.
A dangerous gamble.
A very dangerous gamble. But Jones ran into roadblocks almost immediately. In 1952, he was a student pastor at a Methodist church, but he left. Do you recall why?
Yeah, and this is where the story gets so morally complicated, because he left for a reason that actually sounds well, noble. He wanted to integrate the church. He wanted African Americans in the congregation. And the white church leadership just said no, flat out.
Correct. And this is the paradox of Jim Jones that we have to wrestle with throughout this entire deep dive. Here he is, fighting for racial equality in 1950s Indiana, which was a very segregated time and place. So in 1954, he says, fine, I'll do it myself. He founded his own church. It went through a few names, but eventually became the People's Temple Full Gospel Church, specifically to be a racially integrated congregation.
And he was aggressive about it. He didn't just, open the doors and hope people showed up. He went out and actively recruited African Americans. The membership shifted from something like 15% black to nearly 50% black.
And it wasn't just talk. This is so important to understand. They opened soup kitchens. They were doing job placement. They were buying coal for people to heat their homes in the winter.
So it was tangible help.
Exactly. We have to understand the context of the attendees. If you were a marginalized person in Indianapolis in 1955, maybe you were struggling to pay rent. Maybe you couldn't find a job because of the color of your skin. The People's Temple didn't look like a sinister cult. It looked like a savior. It looked like the only institution in town that actually gave a damn about whether you froze to death.
But, and here's the massive but that always comes with Jim Jones, there was a manipulation happening right alongside all that charity. It wasn't just benevolence.
No, it was a means to an end. And that brings us to the healings.
The healings.
Yeah.
The source material details this, and it is genuinely gross. Jones realized very quickly that to draw a big crowd, and more importantly, to draw in money, you needed a spectacle. He had observed a Seventh-day Baptist faith healing service and basically saw the financial potential.
He saw the economics of faith. He realized that a dry sermon on Marxism draws, 10 people? But a supposed miracle draws 1,000.
So he decided to fake it. But not just, lay hands on someone and say you're cured. He went for a full theatrical scam.
He did. The infamous chicken liver technique.
I could not believe this when I read it. Break that down for us because it sounds completely insane.
Well, it is gruesome, but it was disturbingly effective for his purposes. Jones and his inner circle, his Confederates, would get animal tissue, often chicken livers or gizzards. So during a service, Jones would claim to remove a cancer or a tumor from a congregant's body.
So he's operating on them right there on stage.
Through sleight of hand, a nurse might pass him a towel with the tissue hidden in it, or he'd have it palmed. He'd pretend to reach into their body and then pull out this bloody tissue as physical proof that the sickness had been pulled out of them.
Oh my God. So imagine being in that audience. You're desperate, maybe you're sick or you're poor, and you see this man literally pull a tumor out of someone. You see the blood, you see the tissue. You'd think he was a god.
And that was the point. It generated resources. They admitted later that they knowingly faked these healings to fund their social programs. It's a classic ends justify the means mentality. We are scamming you, but hey, we are using your money to feed the poor. Jones justified it to himself as a necessary evil to build the movement.
It's just so incredibly manipulative. And it worked. He hooked up with the Latter Rain movement, right?
Yes. This was a post-World War II healing revival movement. Jones connected with a man named William Branham, who was a massive, massive figure in that world. Branham endorsed Jones. They held these huge joint conventions, and suddenly Jones went from being a local Indiana preacher to a guy filling auditoriums with 11,000 people.
And he was using other tricks there, too, wasn't he? Like telling people their addresses and social security numbers.
Classic mentalist tricks. His team would go through people's garbage, they actually called it trash sifting, or they'd use private detectives to find this information beforehand. Then Jones gets up on the pulpit and reveals it as a prophetic word.
There is a woman here, Sarah.
Huh?
You live at 123 Elm Street. Your social security number ends in 45.
And the person in the crowd just thinks, how could he possibly know that? It must be God.
Exactly. It solidified his authority as someone with supernatural insight. It made him unquestionable. You can't argue with a man who knows the contents of your wallet.
So let's just pause and look at the board here. You have this growing empire in Indiana. He's got money flowing in from the fake healings. He's got a devoted, integrated following because of the genuine social work. But then as we move into the 1960s, the theology itself starts to shift. He starts pivoting away from anything resembling standard Christianity.
This brings us to part 2 of our outline, this concept of Apostolic Socialism. This is really important to understand. Jones didn't just wake up one day and say, worship me. It was a gradual erosion of their previous beliefs, piece by piece. He started by attacking what he called flyaway religion.
Right. He derided the idea of a sky god. That was his mocking term for the traditional Christian God, who promises rewards in the afterlife while you suffer here on earth. Jones argued that the Bible was a paper idol used to oppress women and non-whites. He basically told them, you are suffering right now, and this book tells you to just take it and wait for heaven. I'm telling you to change things now.
There's a dramatic account in the sources where he literally throws the Bible down on the ground during a service.
He throws it down, he stomps on it, and he yells that he has to destroy this paper idol because it's a tool of oppression. Now think about that. That is a bold, dangerous move for a pastor.
It's incredible that people stayed. I mean, you go to church on Sunday and the pastor stomps on the Bible. That's a line for most people.
But you have to remember the Trojan horse. By this point, he had already convinced them that he was the one providing for them, not the sky god. He was the one who got them a job. He was the one who paid their rent. He had the food, the heating coal, the community. So when he replaced the Bible, he replaced it with himself.
He started teaching that the divine principle was the true God. What even is that?
It was intentionally vague. He created this kind of transitive property of theology. It was very clever, he said. The divine principle is God. Okay? Then he said the divine principle is love. And then love is socialism.
Therefore, God is socialism.
Exactly. And if God is socialism and Jim Jones is the leader of this socialist movement,
Then he's God.
he eventually just said it. He told the congregation, I am come as God's socialist. He positioned himself as a messianic figure, a living embodiment of their belief system. And he structured the community to reflect that, borrowing heavily from a man named Father Divine and the Peace Mission movement. This is where the religious communalism kicks in.
All right, this is the part where the isolation really starts to ramp up. The deal was, you give the temple everything, your house, your car, your savings account, your entire life. And in exchange, the temple takes care of all your needs.
He used a very clever mix of Marx and the Bible to sell it. He'd quote Marx's, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But then he'd immediately tie it to the book of Acts, chapter 4, where the early apostles held all things in common. It made the communism sound biblical. It made it palatable to his Christian followers.
But it wasn't just financial isolation, it was social isolation. He started demanding that members spend holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, with their temple family, not their blood relatives.
And that is a hallmark of high control groups. You have to sever the external ties. If your biological family disagrees with the temple, well, then they are the enemy. They're part of the corrupt capitalist system. You create an us versus them mentality. And nothing builds us versus them better than fear, which leads us to the big move out west.
The Exodus. So Indiana wasn't enough anymore, and Jones had a vision.
Right. In 1961, he claimed to have a vision that Chicago and Indianapolis would be destroyed in a nuclear attack. And remember, this is the height of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis was right around the corner. The fear of the bomb was very, very real in the American psyche. People were building fallout shelters in their backyards.
So he's tapping into a very real existing fear. But the source of his safety information is just hilarious in a really dark way. He didn't get it from God, he got it from a magazine.
Esquire magazine, January 1962. They published an article listing the 9 safest places to survive a nuclear war based on wind patterns and geography. One was Belo Horizonte in Brazil, where Jones actually visited for a while, and another was the area around Ukiah in Northern California.
You're kidding, Esquire.
You can't make it up. His divine revelation about where to lead his people to safety came from a men's lifestyle magazine.
So purely based on that magazine article, he uses this apocalyptic fear to pack up the loyalists, about 140 of his most dedicated followers, and they moved to Redwood Valley near Ukiah, California in 1965.
And this was a critical filter, a brilliant, manipulative move. By moving them across the country, he separated the casual attendees from the diehard followers. If you just liked the soup kitchen, you stayed in Indiana. If you were willing to uproot your entire life and move to California with him, you were all in. You were completely dependent on him in a strange new place.
And once he gets to California, recruitment machine just goes into overdrive again.
Yeah.
The guy was relentless. He gets a job as a teacher.
Yes, adult education. And he used the classroom to recruit. He'd plant loyal temple members in the class to nod along and agree with his Marxist lectures. It creates what psychologists call social proof. If everyone else in the room is nodding and saying amen, you start to think, well, maybe he's right. He recruited 50 new members just from his classes very quickly.
And they expanded. They weren't just staying in the woods of Ukiah. They moved into the cities, San Francisco and Los Angeles. This is where I want to talk about the buses. I've seen pictures of these, the fleet of Greyhound cruisers.
The Temple Cruisers, they had a fleet of 10 to 15 of these huge buses. They would tour the state, even the country, recruiting and fundraising. Jones rode in bus number 7.
Which was special, right? It was modified.
It was lined with metal plates for protection. He was already paranoid, or at least he was projecting paranoia to his followers. He told them he was a target. They were out to get him, the capitalists, the fascists, the CIA.
And the money just kept rolling in. The source says they were netting $15,000 to $25,000 a week just in Los Angeles. That is a massive amount of money in the early 70s. We're talking millions in today's money annually.
Massive. And they were selling trinkets, too. Healing oils, keychains, blessed photos of Jones. And again, the hypocrisy is just stunning. Jones is preaching against idol worship and capitalism. But if he could sell a blessed photo of himself to pay for the gas in the buses, he'd do it in a heartbeat.
So they have the money, they have the members, and now they are in the big city, San Francisco. This brings us to part 4 of our outline, the San Francisco years. And this is the part that really challenges that fringe cult narrative. Because in San Francisco, they weren't on the margins at all. They were players.
They were a political machine. By the mid-70s, the temple claimed to have 20,000 members. Now, historians think the reality was probably closer to 3,000 or maybe 5,000 active members, but that doesn't really matter. What mattered was mobilization. Jones could snap his fingers and have 2,000 volunteers ready to walk precincts, stuff envelopes, or show up at a protest within 6 hours.
That is a politician's absolute dream. You can't buy that kind of loyalty or that kind of manpower.
Exactly, and that political power bought him mainstream legitimacy. He wasn't some weirdo on the outside looking in anymore. He was instrumental in getting George Moscone elected as mayor of San Francisco in 1975. It was a super tight race, and the temple volunteers stuffing envelopes and getting out the vote likely made the difference.
And Moscone rewarded him for it. He appointed Jim Jones as the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission. I mean, let that sink in for a second. The guy who would later order the death of over 900 people was in charge of public housing in a major American city.
It creates a massive cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? He was a bureaucrat. He sat in meetings, he banged a gavel, and look at the list of supporters. The source names him explicitly. Governor Jerry Brown, Willie Brown, who is one of the most powerful politicians in California, and most famously, Harvey Milk.
Harvey Milk wrote letters supporting Jones. He spoke at temple rallies.
He did. He even wrote a "To Whom It May Concern" letter defending Jones against accusers, calling him a man of the highest character. Jones met with First Lady Rosalind Carter. He met with Vice President Walter Mondale.
Why? I mean, did they not see the cracks?
You have to look at the public face versus the private face. Publicly, the People's Temple was this integrated, progressive army that ran care homes for the elderly, foster homes for kids, and rehab programs for addicts. They were doing the hard, messy social work that the government was struggling to do.
They were a charismatic bureaucracy.
That's the term sociologist John Hall uses, and it's perfect. They function like a social service organization, but one oriented entirely around the charisma of one single leader. The politicians saw the results, they saw the votes, and they saw the social services. And they chose to ignore the rumors. They thought, well, okay, maybe he's a little eccentric, but look at all the good work they're doing.
But while the mayor and the governor are heaping praise on him, the reality inside the temple was getting dark. Really, really dark.
This is the hidden reality. The structure was incredibly hierarchical and racially stratified. At the top, you had the staff, mostly college-educated white women. They were the administrators, the managers, the secret police. They managed the money and all the secrets.
And the rank and file, the troops, as they were called, were 70 to 80% black working-class members. So you have this white socialist leadership essentially living off the labor and the donated assets of a largely black congregation.
It's a deeply disturbing dynamic that mirrors the very plantation system Jones claimed to be fighting against. It's a huge contradiction. And the discipline was brutal. We're talking about public beatings, which they called spankings, with a wooden paddle in front of the whole congregation.
Spankies makes it sound almost trivial, like something for a child.
It wasn't. It was assault. Grown men and women were beaten bloody. They held forced boxing matches where members who had a disagreement had to fight each other. Imagine being forced to physically fight your friend or your sibling in front of a cheering crowd just because Jones wanted to teach you a lesson in humility.
And the sexual control.
Jones used sex as a weapon of power and humiliation. He coerced women into having abortions because he didn't want members having children that would distract from the cause. He demanded sexual favors from the wives of male members, often to humiliate the husbands. He also raped male members. It was about total domination, breaking down every individual boundary so that the only relationship that mattered was the one with father, with Jones.
And the paranoia was fueled by drugs at this point.
Heavily. Jones began using amphetamines and other drugs constantly. His behavior became more and more erratic. He told them the KKK was coming for them, then it was the Nazis, then it was the U.S. government itself. He was constantly ramping up the fear to keep them loyal. He created a siege mentality. The whole world is against us, and only I can protect you.
But secrets that big? They don't stay secret forever, especially with that level of abuse. This leads us to part 5, the turn. The media starts sniffing around again.
It started as early as 1972 with a reporter named Lester Kinsolving at the San Francisco Examiner. He wrote a series exposing the fake healings, the finances, the strange rituals. He was onto them.
But the temple fought back. Hard.
Oh, they did. They picketed the paper's offices for days. They threatened lawsuits. They harassed the editors relentlessly. They flooded the paper with letters to the editor. And it worked. The series was canceled halfway through. They learned a valuable lesson. Intimidation worked. They learned that if you scream loud enough, the media and the establishment will back off.
But then came the Gang of Eight. This sounds like something out of a thriller movie.
It really does. In 1973, 8 young members, mostly the children of the leadership or trusted insiders, decided to defect. These were people who grew up in the movement. They saw the hypocrisy and the abuse up close, and they'd had enough. But they knew Jones had search parties, literally armed guards who would hunt down defectors.
But what did they do? How did they get out?
They loaded 3 trucks with firearms and supplies and just drove. They headed for Canada, avoiding the main highways, absolutely terrified they were being followed. They ended up in Montana and wrote a long, detailed letter documenting all the abuse.
And how did Jones react to this defection?
He went ballistic. He completely lost it. He waved a pistol at his planning commission, the inner circle. He threatened suicide for the whole group right then and there. This is the first time he really articulates the mass suicide idea as a response to persecution. He basically said, if they come for us, if the world closes in, we will all go together in a blaze of glory.
But the final straw was in 1977. New West magazine.
That was the breaking point. A reporter named Marshall Kilduff was writing a piece that was going to blow the lid off everything. The beatings, the financial fraud, the sexual abuse. The temple couldn't stop this one. It was too well sourced with too many credible defectors on the record.
There's this cinematic moment where the editor of the magazine calls Jones before it publishes. It was a courtesy call to read him the article.
Right, and while Jones is on the phone listening to this long list of his crimes being read out, the fraud, the violence, all of it, he writes a note to his aides who are in the room with him. The note says, "We leave tonight. Notify Georgetown."
Georgetown, Guyana, the location of their remote settlement.
The exodus to the jungle began immediately. They fled in the middle of the night to beat the magazine to the newsstands.
So they go to Guyana. This was supposed to be the promised land, a socialist paradise in the jungle.
That's how Jones sold it. He sold it as a sanctuary, a place in a black country where they could escape American racism and what he called creeping fascism. He told them they would finally be free. But the reality...
Camp.
It was essentially an agricultural project in the middle of a dense, unforgiving jungle. The soil was poor for farming. They were overcrowded. You had 1,000 people living in these cramped little cottages. They worked 6.5 days a week, long hours in the tropical heat. The food was mostly just rice and gravy.
And Jones ramped up the psychological terror, the White Knights.
These were suicide drills. This is so crucial to understanding the end. He would wake everyone up in the middle of the night screaming over the loudspeaker that the mercenaries were coming or the CIA was attacking.
It's pure psychological torture.
Total torture. He would line them all up. He would give them a drink and tell them it was poison. They would drink it, weeping, hugging their children, fully believing they were about to die. And then, when nothing happened, he would tell them it was a test of loyalty. I wanted to see if you were brave enough for revolutionary suicide.
So he was conditioning them. He was desensitizing them to the real thing.
Precisely. He was normalizing the act of suicide, reframing it as a revolutionary act of protest. He made the unthinkable familiar.
And that brings us to November 1978, the end. It all started with a visit from a congressman, Leo Ryan.
Leo Ryan was a hands-on kind of politician. He had heard from a group of concerned relatives back in California that people were being held in Jonestown against their will, so he decided to go see for himself. He flew down there with a delegation of journalists, aides, and some of the family members.
He flies down there November 17th, 1978. At first, it seems okay, right? They put on a big show for him, a party.
Oh yeah, Jones put on a show. There was music, dancing. The residents were all coached to smile and say how happy they were. But the cracks appeared almost immediately. During the festivities, a reporter, Don Harris from NBC, was slipped a note by a member. The note said, "Help us get out of here."
The facade just crumbles.
It completely falls apart. The next day, November 18, Ryan confronts Jones. He says he's taking anyone who wants to leave with him, and about 15 members brave the intense fear and say, "I'm going."
Jones acts like he accepts it, but he's just seething. There's this chaotic scene where a temple member tries to stab Ryan with a knife but fails. They all rush to the airstrip at Port Kaituma to get on the planes and get out.
And that's when the tractor trailer pulls up to the airstrip.
The temple security guards, the Red Brigade.
They opened fire on the planes. They shot Congressman Ryan multiple times. They shot 3 journalists, Don Harris, Bob Brown, and photographer Greg Robinson. They shot a defector. They killed 5 people right there on the tarmac. Ryan's aide, Jackie Spire, who is now a congresswoman herself, was shot 5 times, but miraculously survived by playing dead.
This is the absolute point of no return. They've just assassinated a U.S. congressman. Jones knows the U.S. military will be coming for them now.
He returns to the main pavilion in Jonestown and calls the entire congregation together. He gets on the loudspeaker and tells them the congressman is dead. He tells them the parachutists are on their way. He tells them they will torture the children and the seniors. He says the only way out, the only dignified response is revolutionary suicide.
And the vat is brought out, and we need to correct the record here very clearly. It wasn't Kool-Aid.
No, it was Flavor Aid, a cheaper competitor, great flavor laced with cyanide, and a cocktail of tranquilizers like Valium.
The source notes that 918 people died. But it wasn't a willing suicide for everyone, was it?
No, that is a crucial distinction. The autopsy reports and the few eyewitness accounts show that many were injected with syringes against their will. The infants and children, 276 of them, they could not consent to suicide. They were murdered by their parents and nurses who squirted the poison into their mouths. People who resisted were held down and forced. It was mass murder-suicide.
It's just horrifying. And Jones, he didn't drink the poison himself?
No, he died of a gunshot wound to the head. It's listed as likely self-inflicted, though some speculate his nurse, Annie Moore, might have shot him and then herself. We'll probably never know for sure.
The aftermath was just chaos. The images of the bodies, the rumors of hit squads coming back to the U.S.
That's right. The survivors back in the U.S. were terrified. They went into hiding. They thought these brainwashed assassins were roaming the streets to silence them. And tragically, the violence didn't end that night. There was a former member, Michael Prokes, who held a press conference a few months later to defend Jones, and then he went into the restroom and shot himself.
And the murder-suicide of Paul Adams and the Guyanese ambassador, the trauma just rippled out for years.
It did. The temple as an organization dissolved, bankruptcy. The buildings in California were sold or destroyed, but the scar obviously remains.
So let's try to wrap our heads around this, if that's even possible. We've gone from an integrated church in Indiana fighting for civil rights to a political powerhouse in San Francisco to a horrific massacre in the jungles of Guyana.
It's the duality that is so hard to reconcile. It was a charismatic bureaucracy that did genuine good. It fed the hungry. It housed the homeless. It fought for equality while simultaneously building this internal machinery of abuse, exploitation, and control.
It's scary because it didn't start crazy. It started with ideals that a lot of people would agree with: equality, justice, community.
And that, for me, raises the most provocative question of all. Why do we just dismiss this as crazy cultists?
What do you mean by that?
Well, historians are still divided on Jones. Did he believe his own Apostolic Socialism, or was he just a cynical con man from day one? We don't know. But maybe the scariest part isn't Jones himself. It's the fact that he was able to use the legitimate language of social justice, the very things that attracted good, idealistic people to him in the first place, to lead them down a path to utter destruction.
That's the terrifying part.
Yeah.
These weren't stupid people. They were teachers, nurses, social workers, activists. They were people who genuinely wanted to change the world for the better.
Exactly, they were. So if they could be led down this path by a leader using the right buzzwords and the right bureaucratic structure, What does that say about the vulnerability of any true believer in any movement, political or otherwise? At what point does dedication cross the line into delusion?
That is a thought that's going to keep me up tonight.
As it should. It's a question we should all ask ourselves.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It was a heavy one, but a really important one.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
See you on the next deep dive.